How to understand people and read human behavior deeply. Introduction. Interaction intelligence, understanding people and decoding human behavior. In every society, across every culture, and throughout every period of human history, relationships have been at the heart of the human experience. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, no matter how quickly our world changes, one truth remains unshaken. People still need to understand one another. We communicate, we argue, we connect, we misunderstand, we love, we avoid, we compete, and we cooperate. Every moment of our lives is shaped by human interaction, and every decision we make is influenced, directly or indirectly, by the behavior of others. Yet for all the time we spend with people, the human mind remains one of the least understood realms in everyday life. Many of us move through life relying on instinct, reacting to situations without truly understanding what drives people or why conversations unfold the way they do. We find ourselves puzzled by someone's attitude, confused by a sudden change in behavior, or hurt by a reaction we never saw coming. We assume others see the world the way we do, think as we think, and feel as we feel, only to discover that human behavior is far more complex, layered, and deeply shaped by invisible forces. This gap between what we think we know and what truly shapes human actions is exactly where misunderstanding is born. Interaction intelligence is the ability to navigate this complexity with clarity. It is the capacity to read people not only through their words, but through tone, expression, behaviors, motivations, and the subtle signals hidden beneath the surface. It is the combination of emotional awareness, social perception, behavioral understanding, and practical communication skills. Interaction intelligence does not depend on talent, luck, or personality type. It is a skill that anyone can learn, strengthen, and refine over time.
This book exists because understanding people is not a luxury. It is a necessity. Whether you are a student, a parent, a leader, a partner, or simply someone seeking deeper connection, every aspect of your life will reflect the quality of your interactions. Conflict becomes easier to navigate when you understand its roots. Conversations become richer when you listen beneath the words. Relationships become healthier when you understand emotional signals. Decisions become wiser when you decode motivations rather than react to surface behavior. Most importantly, understanding people begins with understanding yourself. You are not only an observer of behavior, you are also a participant in every emotional exchange. Your reactions shape the reactions of others. Your moods set the tone of conversations. Your past experiences filter how you interpret someone's actions. Interaction intelligence is not merely looking outward. It is about developing the awareness to see inward as well. Because once you understand the patterns within yourself, you suddenly gain clarity about the patterns in everyone around you. To truly understand people, we must begin by acknowledging a fundamental truth. Human behavior is never random. Behind every word, every emotion, and every action, there are layers of psychology at work. People behave based on needs, fears, beliefs, insecurities, desires, memories, biases, and the unseen impact of their environment. Some of these forces are conscious, but many operate beneath awareness, shaping choices in subtle ways. When someone reacts harshly, withdraws suddenly, or speaks with irritation, the cause is rarely the situation itself. It is usually the internal meaning they attach to the situation.
Our role is not to judge behavior, but to understand it. When you see the full picture of someone's emotional landscape, the puzzle of their actions becomes clearer. You begin to ask better questions. What emotion is driving this reaction? What belief sits behind this behavior? What fear or insecurity is being triggered? What need is this person trying to meet? What is the intention behind the action, even if the action looks problematic? Interaction intelligence trains you to move beyond assumptions and into insight. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond thoughtfully. Instead of taking things personally, you understand the context. Instead of trying to win arguments, you aim for clarity. This shift in mindset is small, but its impact on your life is immense. Understanding people also requires recognizing that behavior is influenced not only by inner psychology, but also by social dynamics. Humans are shaped by the groups they belong to, the roles they play, the expectations placed upon them, and the invisible pressures surrounding them. We change slightly depending on whom we speak to. We may be confident with friends, quiet at work, polite with strangers, and emotional with loved ones. These shifts are not signs of inconsistency. Rather, they are reflections of deep social intelligence that humans have relied on for survival since ancient times.
The challenge is that most of these changes happen automatically. We rarely stop to consider how the social environment shapes behavior. A harsh tone may not reflect someone's personality, but their stress level at that moment. A cold reaction may not reveal their true feelings, but their inability to express vulnerability. A defensive attitude may not be about you at all, but about a long history of pain they learned to suppress. Once you begin to see behavior as a complex interplay of psychology and environment, your relationships transform. You stop expecting perfection from people and begin to interact with greater compassion, patience, and understanding. Another essential aspect of interaction intelligence is the ability to decode nonverbal communication, the language that people speak without speaking. More than half of human communication occurs through body language, facial expression, posture, eye movement, breathing patterns, and tone of voice. A single expression can reveal what someone truly feels, even when their words attempt to hide it. A shift in tone can communicate more than a sentence. A pause in a conversation may carry emotional weight stronger than a long speech. Learning to read these signals is like learning a new language, a language that reveals the truth beneath the surface. At the same time, understanding people also requires recognizing the limits of interpretation. Not every gesture carries deep meaning, and not every emotion can be decoded instantly. The goal is not to become someone who analyzes every breath and blink, but someone who pays careful attention and listens with full awareness. Interaction intelligence is not about controlling or manipulating people. It is about understanding them with enough clarity to communicate effectively, resolve tension peacefully, and connect authentically.
Finally, interaction intelligence empowers you to build stronger, more fulfilling relationships. The quality of your relationships often determines the quality of your life. When you know how to understand people, misunderstandings decrease, respect increases, and emotional safety becomes easier to create. You develop the ability to see people not as obstacles or mysteries, but as individuals shaped by experiences, dreams, and vulnerabilities, just like your own. This shift brings warmth into your interactions, depth into your conversations, and meaning into your connections with others. Throughout this book, we will explore the deep psychology behind human behavior, the subtle art of reading people, the power of emotional awareness, and the practical tools necessary to navigate relationships with confidence and intelligence. You will discover how to understand the unspoken, how to interpret behavior accurately, how to communicate with empathy, and how to build a stronger presence that influences others naturally. This journey is not merely intellectual, it is transformational. By the end of this book, you will see people with new eyes, speak with greater clarity, listen with deeper awareness, and move through the world with a calm, strong understanding of how human behavior works. More importantly, you will understand yourself, your triggers, your patterns, your emotional habits, and the ways your own mind shapes your interactions. Because the more you know yourself, the more capable you become of understanding everyone around you. Interaction intelligence is not a talent reserved for a few. It is a skill that belongs to everyone willing to observe, learn, and grow. This book is your guide to mastering that skill, one insight, one conversation, and one human connection at a time.
The Roots of Human Behavior. Why People Do What They Do. Human behavior is not a collection of random reactions or unpredictable impulses. It is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of biology, emotion, memory, environment, and the deep layers of the subconscious mind. To understand people and read their actions accurately, we must begin by examining the roots of behavior itself. Because every attitude, every choice, and every emotional shift emerges from hidden forces that most people are barely aware of. When we observe someone's reaction on the surface, we are seeing only the final result of internal processes that began long before the moment we witnessed. In many ways, behavior is like the visible tip of an iceberg, while beneath the water lies the vast and invisible structure that supports and shapes what we see above. This chapter explores that immense hidden structure, revealing the motivations, fears, needs, and psychological patterns that drive people in their daily lives. From the moment a human being is born, behavior begins to take form through instinctive reactions that are deeply rooted in biology. A newborn does not understand language or social dynamics, yet it cries when uncomfortable, relaxes when held, and seeks warmth, safety, and nourishment. These fundamental needs remain with us throughout life, though they gradually take more complex shapes. The need for safety becomes emotional security. The need for nourishment becomes the desire for support and validation. And the instinct to connect becomes the pursuit of belonging, friendship, and love. Beneath every social interaction lies a human being trying, consciously or not, to fulfill these basic needs. When someone behaves aggressively, avoids conversation, becomes overly controlling, or withdraws emotionally, it is rarely because of the words spoken in the moment. It is because one of these underlying needs is activated, threatened, or unmet. The mistake many people make is to judge the reaction without understanding the need driving it.
As the child grows, the formation of behavior becomes closely tied to experiences. Every moment of praise, every moment of fear, every failure, every success, and every emotional hurt forms a mental imprint that shapes the way the child interprets the world. A child who grows up in an environment of encouragement may develop confidence and openness, while a child raised amid criticism or unpredictability may become cautious, defensive, or hypersensitive to rejection. These early experiences form what psychologists call core beliefs, the deep assumptions the mind makes about itself and about the world. A person who grew up believing, "I must be perfect to be valued," will behave differently from someone who believes, "I am worthy even if I make mistakes." These beliefs operate silently, yet they guide the individual's responses in conversations, relationships, and conflicts. Sometimes, two people may face the same situation, but interpret it in completely different ways because their underlying beliefs color their perception. When we understand the role of core beliefs, we become more capable of interpreting behavior accurately instead of jumping to conclusions. Memories also play a powerful role in shaping behavior. The mind stores emotional experiences with remarkable detail, especially moments that involve fear, embarrassment, rejection, or intense joy.
These memories do not simply remain in the past. They continue to influence present actions through emotional associations. A person who once felt judged in front of a crowd may avoid public speaking years later, even if the environment is safe. Someone who suffered betrayal may find it difficult to trust others even when there is no logical reason for suspicion. A person who was humiliated might react aggressively to even a minor criticism, not because the comment warrants such a reaction, but because the emotional wound from the past has been triggered. These triggers often catch people by surprise because they operate below conscious awareness. Understanding this mechanism helps us see that behavior is often less about the present moment and more about echoes from the past.
Beyond personal history, environment greatly shapes human behavior. People adapt their actions to match the expectations of the context they are in, often without noticing. We behave differently in a classroom, at work, at home, and with friends because each environment creates a set of invisible rules that guide behavior. In groups, people tend to mirror the energy around them. If the environment is tense, many individuals will unconsciously become more guarded. If the environment is supportive, people tend to open up. Social psychologist Solomon Asch conducted famous experiments showing how people change their answers to match the group, even when the group is clearly wrong. This reveals the human need for acceptance and belonging, a powerful force that shapes behavior more than many realize. When someone acts in unexpected ways, the environment may be influencing them more than personal preferences. This understanding helps us interpret behavior not as a fixed trait, but as a dynamic response to the situation. Fears and insecurities are also significant drivers of behavior. Every person, even those who appear confident, carries hidden fears. These fears may revolve around failure, rejection, losing control, appearing weak, being misunderstood, or facing uncertainty. When fear is activated, people behave defensively, even if the threat is imagined rather than real. For example, when someone interrupts or speaks loudly, the reaction may come from a fear of being ignored. When someone becomes overly critical, it may stem from a fear of inadequacy. When someone avoids confrontation, it may be driven by a fear of conflict or rejection. Understanding these fears allows us to approach others with empathy instead of frustration. The person who appears stubborn may not be stubborn at all. They may simply be afraid of losing stability. The person who seems distant may be protecting themselves from emotional harm. The more we learn about human fears, the clearer behavior becomes.
Emotions are another fundamental driver of behavior. Many people underestimate just how much emotions shape decisions, even when the decisions appear rational. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio discovered that people who lose the ability to feel emotions, even if they retain full logical ability, become unable to make decisions. This means emotions are not the opposite of logic, they are part of decision-making itself. When someone is angry, their perception narrows, focusing on threats. When someone is anxious, they exaggerate potential dangers. When someone feels appreciated, they become more cooperative and open. When someone feels ignored, they may withdraw or lash out. Behavior cannot be separated from emotional state. A person's actions at any given moment often reflect how they feel far more than what they think. This is why understanding emotions, both visible and hidden, is essential to understanding behavior. Cognitive biases also shape the way people behave. These are mental shortcuts the brain uses to simplify complex information. The problem with these shortcuts is that they often distort perception.
For example, the confirmation bias leads people to interpret information in a way that supports their existing beliefs. The availability bias makes people overestimate the likelihood of events they can easily recall. The halo effect causes people to assume that someone who is good in one area must be good in all areas. These biases influence the way we see others, the way we judge behavior, and the way we make decisions, often without realizing it. When we understand these mental patterns, we become more patient and less judgmental, because we realize behavior is shaped by psychological limits rather than conscious intention.
Another powerful influence on behavior is the subconscious mind. Much of what people do is driven by processes they are not aware of, including instincts, habits, emotional associations, and automatic responses formed long ago. A person may repeat a behavior not because they consciously choose it, but because their subconscious mind is conditioned to react in that way. For example, someone who learned to avoid conflict as a child may continue doing so in adulthood without understanding why. Someone who was rewarded for being helpful may develop a habit of pleasing others even when it harms their own needs. Understanding this subconscious element helps us see that changing behavior requires more than willpower. It requires awareness and the gradual reprogramming of these automatic patterns. Social roles further influence behavior in predictable ways. A person may act differently as a parent, as a coworker, as a friend, or as a leader because each role carries expectations. These expectations can be empowering or restrictive. A person who feels pressure to appear strong may suppress vulnerability, leading others to misinterpret their silence as indifference. A person who is expected to be responsible may carry burdens quietly and behave with seriousness that others mistake for coldness. Understanding these social roles helps us interpret behavior within context rather than in isolation.
Cultural background also shapes how people behave and how they interpret the behavior of others. Cultures vary in their expression of emotion, communication style, view of authority, pace of life, and expectations around politeness. When people from different backgrounds interact, misunderstandings can happen, not because of personal flaws, but because of cultural differences. Someone who responds directly may be perceived as rude by someone from a more indirect culture. Someone who avoids eye contact out of respect may be seen as evasive in another culture. Recognizing these differences expands our ability to read behavior accurately and interact with sensitivity. With all these influences, biology, memory, emotion, subconscious patterns, environment, fear, culture, and cognitive biases, it becomes clear that behavior is rarely a simple choice. It is the result of many layers operating together, often outside conscious awareness. When we look at someone's actions with this understanding, we begin to see the deeper truth. People behave the way they do for reasons that make sense to them. Their reactions are shaped by a lifetime of experiences, some remembered, some forgotten, many still active beneath the surface. Their moods reflect internal struggles we may never know. Their patterns reflect emotional needs they may not know how to express.
This realization shifts the way we interact with others. Instead of reacting impulsively, we respond with curiosity. Instead of assuming intention, we seek understanding. Instead of taking things personally, we recognize that most behavior has little to do with us. And instead of judging people for their flaws, we see them as human beings, shaped by forces as complex and powerful as those that shape our own behavior. Understanding the roots of behavior is the foundation of interaction intelligence. It allows us to move through the social world with clarity, empathy, and precision. When we know where behavior comes from, we can interpret it accurately, navigate relationships more effectively, and create deeper and more meaningful connections with the people around us.
Chapter 2. The Silent Language. Understanding Nonverbal Communication.
Human communication is often assumed to be a matter of words, sentences, and carefully chosen expressions, yet the truth is far more complex and far more profound. Long before humans learned to speak, long before language took shape, people communicated through gestures, facial expressions, posture, movement, and tone. These nonverbal cues form the earliest foundation of interaction, and they remain today not only relevant but dominant in shaping how we interpret and understand one another. Scientists estimate that the majority of emotional meaning in a conversation is communicated without words, carried not through the literal phrases spoken, but through the subtle, quiet, often invisible signals expressed by the body. Chapter 2 explores this silent language and reveals how mastering nonverbal awareness allows us to read people with astonishing accuracy, often more accurately than through their words alone. To understand nonverbal communication, one must begin with the recognition that the body rarely lies. While people may choose their words carefully, mask their intentions, or attempt to conceal their emotions, their bodies tend to reveal the truth. A forced smile cannot hide the tension in the eyes. A calm tone cannot disguise the stiffness of the shoulders. A polite conversation cannot erase the subtle distance someone puts between themselves and another person. These cues exist because the human body is deeply connected to emotional experience, and emotional states naturally express themselves physically. When the mind feels threatened, the body tightens. When the mind feels safe, the body relaxes. When a person feels confident, their posture expands. When they feel insecure, their posture collapses inward. These patterns are universal, transcending culture, age, and language, because they arise from the biology of emotion itself.
Facial expressions are one of the strongest sources of nonverbal information. The face contains dozens of micromuscles that react instantly to emotional shifts, often before the individual becomes consciously aware of their own feelings. Psychologist Paul Ekman discovered that certain facial expressions are universal. Joy, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, and disgust are recognized in every culture on Earth. Even a newborn can interpret expressions naturally. When someone raises their eyebrows slightly, they signal interest or curiosity. When they press their lips together, they may be holding back anger or disapproval. When their eyes widen, they are either surprised or trying to appear more innocent than they feel. Even subtle changes around the eyes, such as tightening or softening, may reveal whether a smile is genuine or forced. A real smile engages both the mouth and the eyes. A polite or fake smile usually involves only the mouth, while the eyes remain unchanged. Mastering facial reading requires not judgment, but observation, a quiet awareness that notices the slight flicker of an expression before it disappears. Eye contact is another powerful nonverbal indicator. The eyes do more than look. They reveal thought, attention, confidence, and emotional intention. Strong, steady eye contact often communicates confidence, sincerity, and interest, while avoiding eye contact can signal discomfort, insecurity, or distraction. Yet eye contact must always be interpreted in context. In some people, avoiding eye contact stems from cultural norms or personal shyness rather than dishonesty. Prolonged eye contact, on the other hand, may communicate dominance, confidence, or even confrontation, depending on the situation. The key is not whether someone looks directly into your eyes, but how their gaze behaves within the emotional flow of the interaction. A gaze that shifts away during vulnerability might signal fear of judgment. A gaze that lingers too long may suggest an attempt to assert control. A soft gaze, combined with relaxed facial muscles, often indicates genuine warmth and openness. By paying attention to these subtleties, one becomes able to understand emotional states even when no words are spoken.
Body posture speaks even louder than facial expressions.
The way a person stands, sits, or walks communicates not only mood, but deeper psychological patterns. An open posture, with shoulders relaxed, arms uncrossed, and chest slightly lifted, suggests confidence, willingness to engage, and emotional transparency. A closed posture, arms folded, shoulders hunched, torso turned away, suggests discomfort, defensiveness, or withdrawal. Someone leaning forward may be deeply engaged in the conversation, while someone leaning backward may be creating distance. A person who sits at the edge of their seat may be anxious or eager, while someone who sinks into the chair may feel secure or disinterested. Posture also reveals how people feel about themselves. A person who consistently contracts their body may be struggling with insecurity, whereas someone whose posture consistently expands may be accustomed to social confidence. In many cases, posture reveals what individuals believe about their value in the situation, whether they feel they belong, whether they feel threatened, or whether they feel superior. Movement and gestures bring additional layers to nonverbal communication. The speed of a person's movements can reveal their emotional state. Slow, deliberate gestures often indicate calmness or deep thought, while fast, abrupt movements suggest anxiety, impatience, or agitation. When someone fidgets, tapping their fingers, bouncing their foot, adjusting their clothing repeatedly, it may indicate nervousness, discomfort, or an inability to relax in the environment. When they use expansive gestures, they may be expressing enthusiasm or confidence. When they keep their hands close to their body or hide them, they may be holding back emotion or attempting to conceal uncertainty. These subtle signals are often more revealing than the words spoken because they occur naturally and spontaneously.
Distance, also known as personal space, is a crucial component of nonverbal communication that varies widely depending on relationships, culture, and emotional state. People instinctively adjust their proximity to others based on how comfortable they feel. When someone steps close, it may signal trust, warmth, or intimacy. When someone increases distance, it may signal discomfort, fear, or a desire for independence. During conflict, people often create physical space as a way of protecting themselves emotionally. During connection, people naturally lean closer. The amount of space people maintain says as much about the relationship as the conversation itself. It reveals where boundaries lie, where comfort begins, and where vulnerability feels safe or unsafe. By observing these patterns, one gains insight into how others perceive the relationship and how they feel in the moment. Tone of voice is another powerful form of nonverbal communication. Even when the words spoken are neutral, tone can convey enthusiasm, irritation, sarcasm, exhaustion, or care. A soft tone may indicate affection or uncertainty. A harsh tone may reflect frustration or stress. A rising tone may convey excitement or anxiety, while a flat tone may suggest boredom or emotional detachment. Tone is often shaped by emotional states that words alone cannot express. A person might say, "I'm fine," yet the tightness in their voice reveals that they are anything but fine. Tone often reveals the truth behind the words, and trained listeners learn to pay attention not only to what is said, but to how it is said. The rhythm, pace, volume, and inflection of speech provide a rich emotional landscape that uncovers hidden feelings. The fascinating aspect of nonverbal communication is that many signals are unconscious. People do not wake up thinking about how they will position their arms, how intensely they will look at someone, or how their voice will shift during emotion. These cues arise automatically, generated by the nervous system in response to internal emotional states. This means nonverbal cues offer a direct window into the truth of a person's mind. When someone says they are calm, yet their hands shake, we believe the hands. When someone claims they are confident, yet their shoulders slump, we believe the posture. When someone insists they are not upset, yet their tone sharpens, we believe the tone. Words are shaped by intention. Nonverbal cues are shaped by emotion, and emotion tends to reveal more than intention.
However, mastery of nonverbal interpretation requires caution. One signal alone rarely provides enough information to accurately understand behavior. A person crossing their arms may not be defensive. They might simply be cold. A person looking away may not be hiding something. They might be thinking. A person with a flat tone may not be angry. They might be tired. The key is to observe patterns rather than isolated signals. Do multiple cues point in the same direction? Does the person's body language match their tone and expression? Does the behavior contradict their words? True interpretation emerges not from guessing, but from noticing consistent alignment or misalignment among various signals. Another essential aspect of nonverbal communication is the context of relationships. People behave differently with those they trust compared to those they fear or those they try to impress. A relaxed posture with a close friend may become tense with a superior. A person who avoids eye contact with strangers may maintain strong eye contact with loved ones. Understanding the relational context allows us to interpret nonverbal signals accurately and compassionately. It teaches us to avoid assumptions and instead approach interpretation with curiosity and humility. One of the most powerful aspects of nonverbal awareness is the ability to detect emotional congruence or incongruence. Congruence occurs when verbal and nonverbal signals align, when someone expresses sadness and their tone and posture reflect sadness, or when someone expresses excitement and their energy reflects excitement. Incongruence occurs when words communicate one message, but the body communicates another. This discrepancy often indicates hidden emotion, inner conflict, or something unsaid. Recognizing incongruence allows you to understand the emotional truth beneath the surface and respond with greater sensitivity.
Nonverbal communication also influences others more deeply than words. When you maintain open posture, people feel more comfortable. When you maintain calm tone, people feel safer. When you soften your expression during conflict, tension decreases. When you lean slightly forward when someone speaks, they feel heard. Your nonverbal signals shape the emotional atmosphere of every interaction, often without your awareness. Mastering your own body language is as important as interpreting others, because your signals influence how others behave around you. A tense posture invites defensiveness. A relaxed posture invites openness. A harsh tone provokes conflict. A gentle tone softens it. Nonverbal mastery gives you the ability not only to read emotional states, but to shape them. Understanding the silent language of the body does not make you manipulative. It makes you empathetic. It allows you to sense when someone is uncomfortable, anxious, or overwhelmed, even when they cannot express it verbally. It helps you know when to give space, when to offer support, when to change the subject, when to ask a deeper question, and when to simply listen. It increases the quality of your relationships by allowing you to respond not just to spoken words, but to the emotional currents beneath them. People feel understood not when they are heard, but when they are seen. And nonverbal awareness allows you to truly see them.
As you develop this skill, you begin to experience a profound shift in how you navigate the world. Conversations become richer. Conflicts become easier to resolve. Emotional undercurrents become visible. The world no longer feels chaotic or unpredictable because you can read the signals that others miss. The silent language stops being silent. It becomes clear, structured, and deeply revealing. You begin to understand people not as mysteries, but as human beings whose emotions speak loudly through their bodies. This chapter is the gateway to deeper awareness, the beginning of a skill that will transform how you interpret behavior, how you communicate, and how you connect. Nonverbal communication is the emotional map of the human experience, a map that once understood changes the way you see people forever.
Chapter 3. The Architecture of Perception. How the Mind Interprets People, Reality, and Social Signals. Human perception is often assumed to be an accurate lens through which we understand the world and the people around us. Yet this belief collapses the moment we look closely at how the mind actually works. Perception is not a perfect reflection of reality. It is a construction, a subjective, constantly shifting interpretation shaped by memories, emotions, expectations, fears, culture, and the silent operations of the subconscious. Two individuals may witness the same event and walk away with radically different interpretations. Each believes their view is correct, but both are actually interpreting, not observing. To truly understand people and decode human behavior, one must first understand how perception is formed, distorted, and reshaped by internal processes that operate beneath awareness. Chapter 3 dives into the architecture of perception, the invisible framework that determines how we see others, how we interpret their actions, and why interactions often turn into misunderstandings even when the intention is pure.
Memory plays a dominant role in shaping perception. Every emotional experience from the past creates a perceptual lens through which the present is interpreted. The mind constantly compares present events with past patterns, searching for similarities, matching signals, and predicting outcomes. This predictive nature of the brain helps us survive, but it also creates distortions. For example, a person who was betrayed in the past may perceive neutral behavior as a sign of disloyalty. Someone who experienced neglect may misinterpret distance as a personal rejection. Memories store not just facts, but emotions, and when triggered, these emotions color the perception of the present. When someone reacts strongly to something small, the intensity of the reaction is not about the moment, but the memory that the moment awakens. Thus, understanding perception requires understanding that people are not reacting to you. They're reacting to their internal world, which you happened to activate. Emotion itself is one of the most powerful sculptors of perception. When a person is anxious, their perception narrows, focusing on potential threats and amplifying risk. When someone is angry, their perception becomes confrontational, turning neutral cues into signs of disrespect. When a person is sad, their perception becomes pessimistic, interpreting events through the lens of hopelessness. When someone is in love, their perception becomes idealistic, filtering out flaws and magnifying virtues. Emotion influences not only what we see, but how we interpret what we see, which means that emotional states shape social interactions far more than objective reality. This is why a single conversation can be interpreted differently depending on mood. A joke that seems funny when you are relaxed may feel offensive when you're stressed.
People often judge others based on emotional interpretations rather than actual behavior, which creates cycles of misunderstanding that neither party intended.
Beliefs and expectations further shape perception in subtle yet powerful ways. Beliefs create mental shortcuts that help the brain quickly interpret the world, but they can also trap us in narrow viewpoints. When someone believes that people cannot be trusted, they interpret ambiguous behavior as deception. When someone believes that they are not good enough, they perceive criticism even in supportive feedback. Expectations act similarly. When we expect someone to disappoint us, we notice only their mistakes. When we expect someone to hurt us, we interpret every action through a defensive lens. These internal frameworks create self-fulfilling prophecies. People see what they expect to see, and then respond based on those expectations, which in turn shapes the behavior of others. The result is a cycle where perception creates reality, which reinforces perception. Culture also plays a major role in shaping how people interpret behavior. Every culture teaches specific rules about politeness, emotion, acceptable expressions, personal space, eye contact, and communication style. When people from different backgrounds interact, they may misinterpret each other, not because they lack empathy, but because they are using different perceptual frameworks. A direct communication style may be seen as honest in one culture, but rude in another. A reserved manner may be seen as respectful in one place, but cold in another. A refusal to make eye contact may reflect modesty, not dishonesty. Without understanding cultural lenses, perception becomes a source of misunderstanding rather than connection. The architecture of perception always includes cultural elements that shape how behavior is read, understood, and responded to.
The subconscious mind is another major architect of perception. Most perceptions are formed before conscious awareness even begins. The subconscious processes information at incredible speed, scanning for patterns, recognizing emotional cues, and making judgments based on past experiences. When you meet someone for the first time, you often form an impression within seconds, an impression shaped not by rational analysis, but by subconscious pattern recognition. The subconscious compares voice tone, posture, facial expressions, and subtle cues with thousands of stored memories and emotional associations. This rapid assessment is useful for survival, but prone to error. The subconscious may misinterpret calmness as coldness, confidence as arrogance, or nervousness as dishonesty. People make judgments based not on truth, but on subconscious associations that feel true. Understanding this helps us be less reactive and more curious, recognizing that first impressions are interpretations, not facts. Cognitive biases are deeply intertwined with perceptual distortions. These mental shortcuts help the mind process overwhelming amounts of information efficiently, but they create patterns of misinterpretation that affect how we see people. The confirmation bias leads individuals to notice information that supports their beliefs, while ignoring information that contradicts them. When someone believes a coworker dislikes them, they begin to notice only the signs that reinforce that belief. The halo effect makes people assume that someone who excels in one area must excel in all others, creating overly positive or overly negative impressions. The negativity bias makes people perceive negative events as more significant than positive ones, causing them to fixate on one hurtful comment rather than dozens of kind words. These biases shape not only how we see others, but how we behave toward them, reinforcing cycles of misunderstanding. Perception is also shaped by the need for identity and self-protection. People tend to interpret events in ways that protect their sense of self. When someone criticizes us, we may perceive the criticism as unfair to avoid feeling inadequate. When someone disagrees with us, we may interpret it as hostility to preserve our ego.
When someone succeeds where we fail, we may perceive them as lucky rather than skilled to protect our self-esteem. The mind bends perception to maintain internal stability. Yet this need for protection often clouds judgment, making it difficult to see others clearly. Recognizing this tendency opens the door to more honest interactions because we become aware of how self-defense shapes the way we interpret the intentions of others.
Social comparison also influences perception. Humans instinctively compare themselves to others to evaluate their own standing. This comparison often distorts how we interpret people's behavior. Someone else's confidence may be perceived as arrogance because it triggers feelings of insecurity. Someone else's success may be perceived as undeserved because it threatens one's sense of achievement. Someone else's attractiveness, intelligence, or popularity can distort perception through the lens of competition. This internal comparison often leads to misunderstanding and resentment that have nothing to do with the actual behavior of the other person. Understanding this mechanism helps us separate our internal reactions from reality, enabling us to perceive others with greater fairness and clarity. Another layer of perception arises from what psychologists call projection, the process through which individuals attribute their own thoughts, fears, or insecurities to others. A person who is dishonest may suspect others of lying. Someone who is judgmental may assume others are judging them. Someone who is afraid of intimacy may perceive others as distant or disinterested. Projection occurs because the mind has difficulty recognizing uncomfortable traits within itself, so it relocates them onto others. This creates distorted perceptions that feel real, but are actually reflections of one's inner world. Once we understand projection, we begin to question whether what we see in others is truly about them, or simply a mirror of our own unresolved emotions. The architecture of perception also includes the powerful influence of narrative, the stories people tell themselves about who they are and how the world works. These internal narratives shape interpretation as powerfully as any external event. If someone believes the world is dangerous, they interpret behavior through fear. If someone believes that they are unworthy, they interpret interactions through shame. If someone believes that people are fundamentally kind, they interpret behavior with forgiveness. Narratives influence not only how we see others, but how we see ourselves, and these perceptions determine the quality of our relationships. Changing perception often requires changing the story we tell ourselves, because the story becomes the lens through which everything is filtered.
Because perception is so deeply influenced by inner factors, misunderstandings become almost inevitable. People often assume they're responding to the situation, when in reality, they're responding to their interpretation of the situation. A comment may be perceived as criticism when it was meant as concern. Silence may be perceived as rejection when it reflects distraction. A brief tone of irritation may be interpreted as anger when it reflects stress. Two people can walk away from the same conversation feeling completely different emotions because they were perceiving through entirely different lenses. Understanding this helps us approach interactions with humility, recognizing that our perception is one version of reality, not the only reality. Mastering the architecture of perception involves becoming aware of how your own mind interprets reality. This awareness transforms social interaction. It teaches you to question your assumptions, observe your emotional reactions, and separate what the other person actually did from what you perceived. When someone behaves unexpectedly, instead of reacting, you pause and ask what internal lens may be shaping your interpretation. Awareness weakens the power of biases and allows you to interpret others with greater clarity. You begin to see not only what people do, but why their behavior affects you the way it does.
Understanding perception also teaches you to communicate with more precision. You begin to recognize that what you say is only half of communication. How it is perceived is the other half. You learn to adjust your tone, clarify your intentions, and express your emotions in ways that reduce the likelihood of misinterpretation. You also learn to listen with awareness, not only to words, but to emotions, tone, and context. This reduces conflict, deepens relationships, and increases trust because you are responding to reality rather than to assumptions. As this awareness deepens, the world becomes easier to navigate. People become less confusing, conversations become more meaningful, and misunderstandings become opportunities for clarity rather than sources of frustration. The architecture of perception is the foundation upon which all interaction is built. By understanding how the mind constructs reality, you gain the ability to see beneath the surface, interpret behavior with depth, and connect with others in a way that feels authentic, grounded, and profoundly human.
Chapter 4. The Psychology of Conflict and Misunderstanding. Conflict in its essence is not born from anger, argument, or aggression. It is born from misunderstanding. Whenever two individuals collide in disagreement or emotional tension, the roots of the conflict almost always lie beneath the surface, hidden within the layers of perception, interpretation, emotional history, and unspoken needs. Human beings rarely argue about facts. They argue about meanings, about what something represents, about what it implies, about what it awakens within them. Conflict is the point at which two internal worlds crash into each other, each shaped by memories, fears, expectations, and interpretations that the other may not see or understand. To fully grasp the psychology of conflict, we must understand the invisible forces that turn simple moments into emotional storms, turning misunderstandings into distance, and distance into emotional wounds. At the core of most conflicts is the human tendency to assume intention. People interpret actions not as they are, but as they believe they are meant to be, often without evidence or clarification. When someone speaks abruptly, one person may perceive disrespect, another may perceive stress, and another may dismiss it as normal. The interpretation varies not because of the behavior, but because of the internal lens through which the behavior is viewed. In relationships, this phenomenon becomes intensified. The closer we are to someone, the more personal their actions feel, and the more easily we assume that their behavior is directed at us, rather than influenced by their own internal state. Someone's silence may feel like punishment. Someone's distraction may feel like rejection. And someone's disagreement may feel like an attack. These interpretations form the seeds of conflict long before any argument begins. Ego also plays a powerful role in shaping conflict. The ego is the psychological structure that protects our sense of identity, dignity, and self-worth. When ego feels threatened through criticism, contradiction, or perceived disrespect, it reacts defensively, often escalating the conflict. Ego resists apology, rejects compromise, and seeks validation rather than understanding. When ego dominates, conversations become battles rather than bridges. Instead of trying to understand the other person's perspective, individuals become invested in proving themselves right. In this state, listening disappears, empathy collapses, and communication becomes a series of emotional counterattacks.
Ego transforms minor disagreements into major conflicts by framing the interaction as a threat to one's identity rather than as a simple difference of opinion. In relationships of all kinds, romantic, familial, professional, unmet needs are often the invisible fuel behind conflict. Humans carry deep emotional needs, the need to feel valued, respected, understood, safe, and appreciated. When these needs go unmet, tension builds silently. A person who feels unappreciated may become defensive. Someone who feels unheard may become resentful. Someone who feels unsupported may become distant. These emotional needs rarely vanish. They simply express themselves indirectly through conflict. When someone becomes angry over something small, the true cause may be a long history of feeling unnoticed. When someone withdraws after an argument, the real issue may be fear of emotional injury. Conflict is rarely about the surface behavior. It is about the unspoken emotional need behind it.
Another powerful element of conflict is the difference in emotional processing styles. Some individuals process emotions outwardly. They express, debate, argue, and release energy through communication. Others process emotions inwardly. They retreat, reflect, and require space to understand their own feelings. When these two styles collide, misunderstanding is almost inevitable. The expressive individual sees withdrawal as rejection or avoidance, while the inward processor sees emotional intensity as overwhelming or unsafe. Each believes the other is acting intentionally, not realizing that they are simply operating from different emotional mechanisms. Without awareness of these differences, conflict intensifies as each person reacts not to the other, but to their own emotional discomfort. Projection, as discussed in earlier chapters, plays a strong role in conflict psychology. Individuals often unconsciously project their fears, insecurities, or unresolved emotions onto others. A person afraid of being inadequate may interpret feedback as an attack. Someone who fears abandonment may interpret distance as intentional neglect. Someone who struggles with trust may interpret neutral actions as evidence of betrayal. These projections turn internal fears into external accusations, making conflict almost unavoidable. The other person becomes a mirror, reflecting the individual's internal struggles, and the conflict becomes not between two people, but between a person and their own hidden fear.
Conflict is also fueled by cognitive biases, mental shortcuts that distort judgment. The fundamental attribution error makes people judge others based on character, while excusing their own behavior based on circumstance. If someone else is late, we interpret it as irresponsibility. If we are late, we interpret it as unavoidable. This asymmetry creates resentment and moral judgment, which intensifies conflict. Similarly, the mind's tendency to recall negative interactions more vividly than positive ones causes individuals to anchor themselves in past hurts, making it difficult to interpret new interactions fairly. The human brain also seeks patterns, so once conflict begins, people start noticing only the behaviors that support their negative perception of the other person. These psychological biases lock individuals into conflict even when the original disagreement could have been resolved easily. Stress and emotional overload also distort perception during conflict. When someone is overwhelmed, the brain shifts into survival mode, activating fight, flight, or freeze responses. Logical reasoning weakens, emotional reactivity increases, and the individual loses access to deeper empathy and understanding. In this state, people say things they do not mean, interpret behavior more negatively, and escalate tension unintentionally. Stress transforms small misunderstandings into emotional explosions, not because the issue is serious, but because the emotional system is overloaded. Recognizing the role of stress allows individuals to pause conflict, create space, and return to the conversation with clearer perception.
The psychology of conflict also reveals that humans often argue about the wrong thing. What they debate is the content. What they truly feel is the emotion beneath the content. People argue about chores, schedules, tone, or small incidents, but the real conflict is about feeling unappreciated, unheard, unsupported, or disrespected. Content is the visible surface. Emotion is the hidden depth. When individuals focus on the surface issue, conflict becomes cyclical and unresolved. When they address the underlying emotion, resolution becomes possible. The challenge is that people are rarely aware of the underlying layer. They respond to the immediate trigger without understanding the emotional wound beneath it. Power dynamics further complicate conflict. In any relationship, personal or professional, perceived imbalances in control, voice, or influence create tension. When one person feels dominated, dismissed, or overshadowed, resentment gradually grows, eventually manifesting as conflict. Conversely, when someone feels pressured to meet expectations they cannot fulfill, they may become defensive or resistant. Power is not merely about authority, it is about emotional leverage. The person who cares more may feel more vulnerable. The person who fears loss may feel less secure. These hidden power structures shape the intensity and direction of conflict in ways that are rarely recognized consciously.
Conflict persists when individuals stop seeing each other as humans with fears, needs, and vulnerabilities, and instead see each other as obstacles, threats, or opponents. The moment empathy disappears, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. Humans are wired to protect themselves when empathy fades, and this self-protection manifests through anger, withdrawal, sarcasm, or coldness. Restoring empathy often dissolves conflict faster than logic, because empathy reconnects individuals to each other's emotional reality. When two people see each other's humanity, the defensive walls collapse and understanding flows more naturally. Ultimately, the psychology of conflict reveals that conflict is not inherently destructive. It is a form of emotional communication that occurs when deeper needs or perceptions are misaligned. Conflict becomes destructive only when it is met with defensiveness, misinterpretation, or emotional disconnection. When approached with awareness, conflict can illuminate hidden emotions, clarify expectations, and deepen relationships. When approached without awareness, conflict can create emotional scars that linger long after the argument ends. Understanding the psychological roots of conflict allows individuals to navigate disagreements with greater wisdom, patience, and emotional intelligence. It teaches us that people are not the conflict, perception is. People are not the enemy, misunderstanding is. People are not the problem, the emotional wounds carried silently beneath their behavior are. Once we understand this, conflict transforms from a battlefield into a doorway into deeper understanding, clearer communication, and more authentic human connection.
Chapter 5. The Hidden Motivations Behind Social Behavior. Human behavior, especially in social settings, is often described on the surface: friendly, distant, generous, aggressive, polite, manipulative, confident, introverted. But beneath this surface lies an intricate network of psychological motivations that shape how people act, react, connect, and disconnect. The motivations are rarely obvious, even to the individuals themselves. Humans tend to believe they behave in rational ways, driven by conscious decisions, logic, and deliberate intention. Yet decades of psychological research reveal that most social behavior is driven not by reason, but by unseen emotional needs, survival instincts, subconscious patterns, and internal narratives inherited from early experiences. To understand why people behave the way they do is to look not at their actions, but at the motivations shaping those actions.
Every smile hides a story, every silence holds meaning, and every reaction reflects an invisible equation of internal forces. The foundation of social motivation begins with one of the deepest human needs, the need to belong. Humans are social creatures not merely by preference, but by evolutionary design. For thousands of years, belonging to a group determined survival. Being excluded was a threat. This ancient instinct still shapes modern behavior. People seek acceptance, validation, and connection, often without realizing they are doing so. The desire to belong drives individuals to adjust their personality in different social environments, adopt group norms, and align their behavior with the expectations of others, even when doing so contradicts their personal desires. The fear of rejection pushes people to avoid conflict, suppress their true feelings, or pretend to be stronger, happier, or more confident than they actually are. Much of social behavior, whether conformity, politeness, defensiveness, or even aggression, can be traced back to the need to maintain a sense of connection and avoid emotional exile.
Alongside belonging is the need for identity. Social interaction is one of the primary ways people define who they are. The individual who wants to be seen as intelligent behaves differently from someone who wants to be seen as powerful, caring, independent, or mysterious. These identity-driven behaviors are often subtle: tone of voice, posture, choices of words, the pace of speech, or the level of openness. People unconsciously shape their behavior to match the version of themselves they hope others will perceive. Sometimes this behavior aligns with their true self. Other times, it becomes a mask designed to protect insecurities. When identity feels threatened, reactions become stronger, more emotional, and more defensive. A simple correction may feel like a personal attack. A disagreement may feel like invalidation. A moment of being ignored may feel like being erased. Understanding that identity protection is a major driver of behavior explains why people often react disproportionately in social settings. It is not the moment itself, but the threat to the internal narrative they live by. Another powerful motivator is the need for emotional safety. People behave in ways that protect them from psychological vulnerability. Some individuals withdraw because vulnerability feels dangerous. Others dominate conversations because silence forces them to confront internal insecurities. Some avoid intimacy because closeness threatens to reveal emotional wounds. Others seek constant reassurance because they fear abandonment. Emotional safety shapes everything from how people express affection to how they respond to conflict. Even avoidance, which appears passive, is often a protective strategy, an attempt to maintain internal stability by preventing emotional overwhelm. Behind every social behavior lies a calculation, conscious or unconscious, about whether the situation threatens or preserves one's emotional well-being.
Power and control are additional elements that influence social behavior profoundly. Humans seek control not only in situations but in relationships because control creates predictability and reduces anxiety. Some individuals exert control through dominance, strong opinions, assertive tone, or intense presence. Others exert control through withdrawal, silence, emotional distance, or refusal to engage. Control is often misunderstood as manipulation, but in many cases it is a coping mechanism. When life feels uncertain or overwhelming, controlling a social interaction offers a sense of stability. The desire for control shapes leadership dynamics, conflict patterns, and even everyday conversations. Understanding this motivation helps us recognize that control is not always malicious. Often, it is simply the mind's attempt to feel secure. Fear of vulnerability is another hidden force behind social behavior. Vulnerability is the emotional exposure that comes with honesty, closeness, and authenticity. Humans fear vulnerability because it exposes their inner world, fears, wounds, insecurities, hopes, and needs. To avoid vulnerability, people develop social defenses, sarcasm, humor, intellectualizing, perfectionism, emotional detachment, or excessive rationality. These defenses protect the individual from emotional danger, but also prevent deeper connection. A person may appear confident, but feel fragile internally. Another may appear indifferent, but care deeply. The disconnect between external behavior and internal reality arises because vulnerability is perceived as a risk, and the mind prioritizes protection over connection when these two desires conflict. Understanding this helps us see that what appears as rejection or disinterest may actually be fear. Humans are also driven by the need for significance, the desire to feel important, valued, and influential. Significance is not arrogance, it is a fundamental psychological need. People want to feel that their presence matters, that their voice has weight, that they contribute something meaningful. When this need goes unmet, behavior becomes reactive. Some seek significance through achievement, others through helping, others through dominance, and some through emotional drama. A person who raises their voice may be trying to feel heard. Someone who interrupts may be trying to assert importance. Someone who constantly provides advice may be seeking relevance. The need for significance shapes conversations, relationships, and social roles, often without conscious awareness.
Another hidden motivator of behavior is the pursuit of predictability. The human mind dislikes uncertainty because uncertainty prevents the brain from preparing for potential danger. Predictability allows the mind to relax. For this reason, people often repeat behaviors, even unhealthy ones, simply because they feel familiar. Familiarity creates psychological comfort, even when it does not create happiness. The mind prefers a predictable discomfort over an unpredictable possibility of pain. This explains why some individuals stay in toxic relationships, maintain self-sabotaging habits, or behave in patterns that do not benefit them. They are not irrational. They are following the mind's desire for the known over the unknown. Reward seeking is another motivational force deeply rooted in the brain's neurobiology. Social interactions provide various forms of psychological reward: attention, approval, affection, admiration, closeness, laughter, or validation. When people receive these rewards, the brain releases dopamine, reinforcing the behavior. This neurological reinforcement explains why people often repeat social behaviors that gave them emotional satisfaction in the past. It also explains why individuals may become attached to relationships that are not healthy, but provide intermittent reinforcement, small moments of affection or approval that create emotional dependency. The brain becomes conditioned to seek the reward even when the relationship overall is harmful. Understanding reward seeking helps us recognize why people behave in patterns that seem illogical from the outside. Social comparison, as discussed earlier, plays a critical role in motivation. Humans instinctively evaluate themselves relative to others, and this comparison shapes behavior in powerful ways. A person who feels inferior may become defensive, competitive, or withdrawn. A person who feels superior may become dismissive, boastful, or detached. These behaviors are not merely personality traits, they are reactions to internal comparisons that most individuals are not aware they are making. Social comparison shapes confidence, humility, jealousy, ambition, and even generosity. A person who feels secure in their self-worth may act kindly without fear. A person who feels threatened may behave competitively even when there is no competition. Recognizing this helps us understand the emotional foundation beneath behaviors that appear confusing or contradictory.
One of the most overlooked motivations is the desire for emotional coherence. People want their actions, beliefs, and identity to align, because internal inconsistency creates psychological tension. When someone behaves in a way that contradicts their self-image, such as acting selfishly when they believe they are generous, they experience discomfort. To reduce this discomfort, individuals either justify their behavior, change their beliefs, or reinterpret the situation entirely. This process, known as cognitive dissonance reduction, shapes social behavior more than many realize. It explains why people defend harmful actions, deny wrongdoing, or reinterpret events in their favor. They are not consciously lying. They are attempting to maintain internal coherence to protect their psychological stability. Another major motivator is emotional reciprocity, the instinct to match the behavior of others. Humans mirror the tone, energy, and emotional state of the people around them. When someone is warm, we tend to become warm. When someone is cold, we become restrained. When someone is hostile, we feel defensive. This mirroring happens automatically through a system of neurons known as mirror neurons, which evolved to help humans empathize, learn, and coordinate socially. Emotional reciprocity explains why calm people de-escalate conflict, why anxious people spread tension, and why confident individuals elevate the energy of a room. The motivation to maintain social harmony often drives people to match the emotional climate, even when doing so contradicts their internal truth.
Behind many social behaviors lies the hidden need for meaning. People seek depth, purpose, and significance in their relationships. This need may express itself through acts of service, intellectual conversation, emotional intimacy, or shared experiences. When meaning is absent, people feel disconnected, even if surrounded by others. This sense of emptiness can lead to withdrawal, irritability, or a desire for dramatic change. When meaning is present, individuals feel anchored, stable, and emotionally fulfilled. Social behavior becomes richer, warmer, and more intentional. Meaning transforms interactions from mechanical exchanges into human connection. Perhaps the most profound hidden motivation in social behavior is the universal longing to be understood. Humans want someone to see beyond their words into their emotions, beyond their behavior into their intentions, beyond their mistakes into their humanity. The desire to be understood shapes how people communicate, argue, forgive, and connect. When someone feels misunderstood, they may react with frustration or despair. When they feel deeply understood, they become open, vulnerable, and trusting. Much of human behavior, both positive and negative, can be traced to the question, does someone truly understand me? Understanding these hidden motivations allows us to read people with a clarity that transcends appearances. It reveals that behind every action lies a need. Behind every reaction lies a fear. Behind every behavior lies a story. When we see the motivations rather than the behavior alone, we become capable of profound empathy, patience, and understanding. We interact not with the mask, but with the human beneath it. And this shift transforms not only our ability to read people, but our ability to connect with them in ways that are authentic, meaningful, and emotionally intelligent.
Chapter 6. The Power of Empathy in Human Interaction. Empathy is often described as the ability to understand another person's feelings, but this definition hardly captures the depth and complexity of what empathy truly is. Empathy is not merely emotional sensitivity or kindness. It is a profound psychological skill, a cognitive and emotional bridge that connects one human mind to another. It is the invisible thread that holds relationships together, the unspoken language that allows two people to feel understood, valued, and seen. Without empathy, communication becomes mechanical, relationships become fragile, and conflict becomes impossible to resolve.
With empathy, miscommunication softens, defenses fall, and understanding flows in ways that logic alone can never achieve. Empathy is not just a social virtue, it is the foundation of human connection. At its core, empathy is the ability to enter the emotional world of another person without losing sight of your own. It requires listening not only to words, but to tone, expression, silence, and emotional energy. When someone speaks, empathy listens to the emotion behind the words. When someone is silent, empathy listens to the meaning behind the silence. This depth of perception makes empathy a transformative force in human interaction, because people often communicate their deepest feelings indirectly. Most individuals struggle to articulate what they truly feel. They express fear as anger, sadness as distance, stress as irritability, insecurity as defensiveness, and love as quiet loyalty. Empathy sees beyond these disguises and recognizes the humanity beneath them.
Empathy begins with presence, the ability to be fully attentive to another person without distraction or judgment. Many people listen with the intention to respond, defend, or advise. Few listen with the intention to understand. When someone speaks and senses that the other person is not fully present, they feel alone, regardless of the words exchanged. When they sense true presence, they feel psychologically held, even when no solutions are offered. Presence is the foundation of empathy because it sends the message, your emotions matter, your experience matters, you matter. This message alone can heal emotional wounds that have lingered for years. One of the deepest powers of empathy lies in its ability to reduce defensiveness. Humans become defensive when they feel misunderstood, judged, or invalidated. When empathy is present, walls crumble because people feel safe enough to reveal their true feelings. Empathy does not mean agreement, it means understanding. By showing someone that their feelings make sense within the context of their experience, empathy allows space for honest dialogue without triggering emotional protection mechanisms. When people feel understood, they no longer need to fight for validation. They can simply be.
Empathy also transforms conflict. As discussed in earlier chapters, most conflict arises not from the event, but from the perceived meaning behind the event. Empathy allows individuals to see the emotional story behind each other's reactions. When someone feels hurt, empathy asks, what pain is being touched? When someone becomes angry, empathy asks, what fear lies beneath the anger? When someone withdraws, empathy asks, what vulnerability is being protected? This shift of perspective changes the emotional climate of conflict because empathy dissolves assumptions and invites curiosity. Curiosity softens tension, while assumption inflames it. Empathy replaces suspicion with insight, blame with understanding, and hostility with compassion. One of the most important dimensions of empathy is emotional resonance, the ability to feel, to some extent, what another person feels. This resonance is made possible by the brain's mirror neuron system, which activates when we observe another person's emotional expressions. When someone cries, the mirror neurons in our brain generate a subtle internal echo of sadness. When someone smiles genuinely, we feel warmth rise within us. This neurological resonance allows humans to connect emotionally even without words, and it explains why empathy feels instinctive.
Another critical aspect of empathy is cognitive understanding, the ability to intellectually grasp someone's perspective. This is often called perspective taking, and it allows individuals to understand not just what someone feels, but why they feel it. Cognitive empathy involves understanding someone's background, personality, emotional triggers,
coping mechanisms, and past experiences. It allows one to see the world from the other person's internal viewpoint. When emotional empathy connects hearts, cognitive empathy connects minds. Together, they form a full comprehension of human experience. Empathy also touches one of the deepest human desires, the desire to be understood. People can endure difficulty, criticism, or distance, but feeling misunderstood cuts to the core of emotional identity. When someone feels
Another critical aspect of empathy is cognitive understanding, the ability to intellectually grasp someone's perspective. This is often called perspective taking, and it allows individuals to understand not just what someone feels, but why they feel it. Cognitive empathy involves understanding someone's background, personality, emotional triggers, coping mechanisms, and past experiences. It allows one to see the world from the other person's internal viewpoint. When emotional empathy connects hearts, cognitive empathy connects minds. Together, they form a full comprehension of human experience. Empathy also touches one of the deepest human desires, the desire to be understood. People can endure difficulty, criticism, or distance, but feeling misunderstood cuts to the core of emotional identity. When someone feels misunderstood, they feel invisible, invalidated, and existentially disconnected. Empathy repairs this disconnection by offering psychological visibility. It says, "I see you beyond your words. I understand you beyond your behavior." When someone experiences this level of understanding, they feel emotionally grounded and safe. Emotional safety, in turn, allows vulnerability, the gateway to deep connection. In relationships, empathy acts as emotional glue. Love without empathy becomes fragile. Communication without empathy becomes transactional. Support without empathy becomes superficial. People do not only need to be helped, they need to be understood. A person may forget advice, but they never forget the feeling of being understood. Empathy strengthens trust because trust is built not only on reliability, but on emotional attunement. When two people are emotionally attuned, they can navigate disagreement, stress, and change without destroying the relationship. Empathy keeps the emotional connection alive even when circumstances create tension. Empathy also enhances emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence involves recognizing emotions in oneself and others, regulating emotional reactions, and responding wisely to emotional information. Empathy is at the center of every one of these skills. Without empathy, emotional intelligence becomes mechanical. With empathy, emotional intelligence becomes intuitive. Empathy teaches individuals to pause before reacting, to consider the emotional impact of their words, and to sense the emotional needs of others. It turns social intuition into a refined psychological skill. Another remarkable power of empathy is its ability to humanize others. Humans tend to judge behavior without understanding the pain behind it. Empathy reverses this instinct. It asks, what hurt created this reaction? What fear shaped this behavior? What story led to this moment? Empathy cannot justify harmful actions, but it explains them in ways that reduce anger and increase compassion. People rarely behave badly without cause. Empathy uncovers those causes, not to excuse them, but to understand them. Empathy also expands moral imagination. It allows individuals to care about people outside their social circle, cultural group, or worldview. Without empathy, humans become tribal, care only about those who resemble them. With empathy, humans expand the boundary of emotional concern, creating societies that value dignity, justice, and equality.
Empathy is the foundation of ethical behavior, because true morality requires the ability to consider the emotional reality of others. Yet empathy is not always easy. It demands humility, the willingness to accept that you do not know everything about someone else's experience. It demands patience, the willingness to listen even when emotions are raw. It demands emotional regulation, the ability to stay centered even when someone else is suffering. It demands courage, the ability to sit with someone's pain without turning away. Empathy often requires entering emotional spaces that feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar, but these spaces are where connection deepens. Empathy also requires self-awareness. People cannot offer empathy if they cannot recognize their own emotions. When individuals are disconnected from their internal world, they project their feelings onto others, assume false intentions, or misread emotional cues. Empathy begins with the ability to recognize, name, and regulate one's own emotions. Only then can one enter the emotional world of another with clarity rather than confusion. Importantly, empathy must be balanced. Too much unregulated empathy leads to emotional exhaustion, boundaries dissolving, and personal identity becoming overwhelmed by the emotions of others. This is often called empathic distress. True empathy is not drowning in someone's emotions. It is swimming beside them. It is not taking responsibility for someone's emotional state. It is supporting them without losing yourself. Empathy becomes powerful only when it is paired with emotional boundaries and internal stability.
Chapter 7. Reading People Through Behavioral Patterns. Human behavior may appear spontaneous, shifting, unpredictable, or inconsistent, yet beneath every action lies a set of patterns that reveal who a person is, how they think, what they feel, and what they fear. These patterns are not merely habits or tendencies. They are expressions of internal psychological structures shaped over a lifetime. To read people accurately is not to focus on isolated moments or single reactions, but to observe the repetition, how a person behaves across time, across situations, across relationships, and across emotional states. Patterns are the signature of personality. They are the echoes of a person's past and the blueprint of their internal world. And once you learn to recognize these patterns, a person who once seemed mysterious becomes understandable, predictable, and emotionally transparent. Reading people through behavioral patterns requires sensitivity to the way emotions manifest repeatedly in action. For example, a person who responds to stress with silence is revealing a fundamental coping mechanism rooted in withdrawal. Someone who reacts with anger reveals a mechanism rooted in external expression. Someone who seeks reassurance reveals a pattern rooted in fear of abandonment. Someone who distracts themselves through humor reveals a pattern rooted in discomfort with vulnerability. These patterns are not mistakes or weaknesses. They are emotional survival strategies the individual learned long before adulthood. A child who grew up in chaos may become hypervigilant. A child who grew up unseen may become overly expressive. A child who grew up criticized may develop perfectionistic or defensive patterns. These early responses evolve into adult behavioral tendencies that emerge repeatedly in daily life. When you observe a pattern, you are witnessing a psychological history playing out in real time. Behavioral patterns also reveal a person's emotional triggers. Everyone has emotional pressure points, areas where even small stimuli evoke strong reactions.
These triggers form consistent behavioral patterns because they activate old emotional wounds or unresolved conflicts within the individual. A person who responds to stress with silence is revealing a fundamental coping mechanism rooted in withdrawal. Someone who reacts with anger reveals a mechanism rooted in external expression. Someone who seeks reassurance reveals a pattern rooted in fear of abandonment. Someone who distracts themselves through humor reveals a pattern rooted in discomfort with vulnerability. These patterns are not mistakes or weaknesses. They are emotional survival strategies the individual learned long before adulthood. A child who grew up in chaos may become hypervigilant. A child who grew up unseen may become overly expressive. A child who grew up criticized may develop perfectionistic or defensive patterns. These early responses evolve into adult behavioral tendencies that emerge repeatedly in daily life. When you observe a pattern, you are witnessing a psychological history playing out in real time. Behavioral patterns also reveal a person's emotional triggers. Everyone has emotional pressure points, areas where even small stimuli evoke strong reactions. These triggers form consistent behavioral patterns because they activate old emotional wounds or unresolved conflicts within the individual. A person who is sensitive to criticism may exhibit defensiveness in multiple contexts, at work, with family, in friendships, even with strangers. Someone who fears rejection may repeatedly interpret neutral behavior as distancing. Someone with a deep fear of failure may overreact to small mistakes. The pattern does not come from the present moment. It comes from an emotional memory stored long ago. By watching how a person reacts in situations that threaten their emotional stability, you begin to see not only their pattern, but the wound behind it. Reading people through patterns means understanding that emotions move in loops, and the mind often repeats its reaction because it has not yet learned a new way to respond.
Personality itself is a collection of patterns. Whether someone is introverted or extroverted, rational or emotional, assertive or passive, structured or spontaneous, these tendencies reveal the psychological architecture of the individual. But even more revealing than personality traits are micro-patterns in daily behavior: how a person talks about themselves, how they listen, how they handle disappointment, how they speak under stress, how they respond when their boundaries are challenged, how they act when they want approval, how they behave when they feel threatened, and how they treat people who cannot offer them anything. These micro-patterns provide a clearer picture of character than any single action ever could. For example, someone who consistently interrupts others reveals a pattern of needing control or validation. Someone who listens carefully reveals attentiveness and empathy. Someone who avoids responsibilities reveals insecurity or fear of failure. These patterns are not random. They reflect the psychological priorities of the person. Behavioral patterns also emerge in the rhythm of a person's relationships. Some individuals form intense connections quickly and break them just as fast. Others avoid closeness altogether. Some repeat the same argument with different people, using the same emotional script regardless of context. Some choose partners who mirror their childhood relationships. Others repeat cycles of abandonment or mistrust. These relational patterns reveal the internal templates people have for love, trust, intimacy, and emotional danger. When someone repeatedly withdraws during conflict, that pattern reflects their emotional archetype for self-protection. When someone repeatedly seeks validation, that pattern reflects their emotional archetype for self-worth. When someone repeatedly becomes jealous, that pattern reflects their fear of loss. Understanding relationships through patterns means recognizing that people do not simply act in the moment. They reenact the emotional patterns that shape them. Patterns also appear in how people interpret the world.
A person who consistently expects negative outcomes reveals a pessimistic cognitive bias formed from past disappointments. Someone who sees opportunity everywhere reveals an optimistic bias rooted in supportive past experiences. Someone who sees threats everywhere reveals a mind trained for survival. Someone who always blames others reveals a pattern of externalizing responsibility. Someone who always blames themselves reveals a pattern of internalizing shame. These patterns of interpretation create self-fulfilling loops, reinforcing the worldview that produced them. The person who expects rejection often behaves anxiously, unintentionally pushing others away. The person who becomes hypervigilant interprets harmless behavior as danger. These perceptual patterns shape reality as much as they reflect it.
Emotional expression follows patterns as well. Individuals rarely express emotions randomly. They tend to have a dominant emotional language. For one person, frustration may be the default expression. For another, sadness. For another, humor. For another, silence. These dominant emotional expressions reveal how comfortable or uncomfortable the person is with different emotional states. A person who cries in moments of stress may have learned early that vulnerability evokes comfort or release. A person who becomes angry may have learned that anger is safer than admitting fear. A person who becomes distant may have learned that emotional withdrawal protects them from hurt. Emotional expression patterns help you understand what the person is truly feeling, even when they express it in disguised form. Behind anger may lie fear. Behind silence may lie sadness. Behind sarcasm may lie insecurity. Behind logic may lie emotional avoidance. Patterns reveal the truth beneath the surface. The mind also forms behavioral patterns based on reinforcement. If a behavior provides emotional relief or reward, comfort, attention, control, avoidance of pain, the mind repeats it. This repetition becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. People who receive sympathy when expressing helplessness may adopt helplessness as a recurring pattern. People who receive approval when being helpful may adopt people-pleasing as a pattern. People who avoid responsibility and encounter no consequences may adopt avoidance as a pattern. To read people through patterns, one must understand that behavior does not persist without reward. The reward may not be obvious. Sometimes it is simply the avoidance of emotional discomfort. But the existence of a pattern reveals that the mind has found something emotionally useful about it. Even destructive patterns serve a psychological purpose until the individual learns a healthier alternative. Another dimension of behavioral patterns lies in predictability. People are often most predictable in situations that threaten their emotional needs. When someone is insecure, their patterns reveal themselves clearly. When someone feels criticized, their patterns intensify. When someone feels unappreciated, their patterns speak loudly. When someone feels overpowered, their protective patterns activate. These moments reveal the core emotional programming of the individual, how they cope with fear, pain, vulnerability, and internal conflict. The more stressful the moment, the clearer the pattern becomes. Under pressure, people revert to their oldest, most deeply conditioned responses. Understanding this allows you to see through emotional chaos and recognize the predictable structure beneath it.
Reading people through behavioral patterns also involves recognizing the difference between stable traits and temporary states. A temporary state is momentary. Anger from a bad day, stress from an unexpected event, irritation from fatigue. A stable pattern is consistent. Anger becomes a default response. Stress becomes a personality tone. Irritation becomes a communication style. Temporary states do not define character. Patterns do. A single moment reveals little. A sequence of similar moments reveals everything. The art of reading people lies in observing the repetition, not the exception. Moreover, the patterns people show in small situations often reveal how they will act in larger ones. Someone who lies about small things often lies about big things. Someone who shows kindness in small gestures often has a deeply compassionate nature. Someone who becomes defensive over minor feedback likely struggles with insecurity. Someone who avoids small responsibilities likely avoids major commitments. The small patterns are micro windows into the personality because they express the internal structure without the person realizing they are revealing it. If you want to understand someone's true nature, observe how they behave when they believe no one is judging them. Patterns also emerge in language. The words someone repeatedly uses, always, never, everyone, no one, I can't, I should, reveal their emotional landscape. A person who speaks in absolutes shows cognitive rigidity. A person who speaks in self-blaming language reveals internal shame. A person who uses distancing language, you people, those kinds of people, reveals emotional detachment or insecurity. A person who tells the same type of story repeatedly, the story of being the victim, the hero, the caretaker, the misunderstood one, reveals the psychological role they have adopted in life. Language is not accidental. It is the bridge between the internal world and the outside world. Patterns in language reveal the recurring emotional themes the person is living.
To read people through behavioral patterns is also to understand the distinction between behavior as communication and behavior as protection. Some patterns express the person's true needs, others protect them from what they fear. Someone who becomes overly helpful may be communicating the need for appreciation, but protecting themselves from feeling useless. Someone who becomes aggressive may be communicating the desire to be respected, but protecting themselves from feeling powerless. Someone who becomes distant may be communicating the need for emotional space, but protecting themselves from vulnerability. Identifying whether a pattern is communicative or protective is essential to understanding the emotional truth behind the behavior. Reading patterns also requires recognizing inconsistencies. People often show different sides depending on context. A person may be confident at work, but insecure in relationships, loving with friends, but distant with family, kind to strangers, but harsh with themselves. These inconsistencies do not indicate deception. They reveal emotional compartmentalization, the mind's way of separating different roles, histories, and vulnerabilities. Recognizing patterns across contexts reveals the emotional zones in which a person feels safe and the zones in which they feel exposed. Ultimately, reading people through behavioral patterns does not mean judging them. It means understanding them. Patterns reveal pain, not weakness. They reveal needs, not flaws. They reveal conditioning, not intention. Every pattern tells a story about survival, adaptation, hope, and fear. And when you read these stories deeply, without assuming, without projecting, without rushing to conclusions, you gain a rare ability. The ability to see people not as they appear in individual moments, but as they truly are beneath the surface, a tapestry of experiences, emotions, memories, and desires, expressed through the only language the mind has ever known, patterns. Chapter 8. The Dynamics of Trust and Vulnerability. Trust is one of the most delicate, powerful, and complex forces in human interaction. It is the invisible foundation upon which relationships are built, the emotional currency that determines whether two people can share their inner worlds or remain hidden behind protective walls. Trust does not appear instantly, nor does it grow by chance. It develops slowly through the repeated experience of safety, honesty, consistency, and emotional attunement. Yet trust can vanish in a moment, collapsing under the weight of betrayal, misunderstanding, or unmet needs. To understand human behavior in its fullest depth, one must understand the dynamics of trust, how it is formed, how it is strengthened, how it is damaged, and how it is rebuilt. Trust and vulnerability are inseparable. One cannot exist without the other. Trust requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires trust, creating a delicate psychological dance that shapes the course of every meaningful relationship in a person's life. At its core, trust is the belief that another person will not intentionally harm us, abandon us, deceive us, or misuse the parts of ourselves we reveal. This belief is not only emotional, it is biological. When we trust someone, our nervous system relaxes, stress decreases, defenses soften. The mind shifts from protection to connection. Our emotional energy becomes available for closeness rather than survival. This biological shift allows us to speak honestly, reveal insecurities, share fears, and express needs without fearing punishment or rejection. In this sense, trust is the psychological environment that makes intimacy possible. Without trust, people speak cautiously, choose their words carefully, and hide their deeper emotional truth to protect themselves from harm. The ability to trust is shaped early in life. In childhood, the consistency or inconsistency of caregivers forms the template for future trust dynamics. A child who experiences reliable love learns that vulnerability is safe and that emotional needs will be met. This child often grows into an adult capable of forming secure connections. In contrast, a child who experiences unpredictability, emotional neglect, or inconsistency learns that vulnerability is dangerous, that expressing needs leads to disappointment, and that others cannot be counted on. This child develops protection strategies, emotional withdrawal, hyper-independence, avoidance, mistrust. These early templates do not determine destiny, but they shape the emotional starting point from which trust must be built.
Trust, therefore, is not simply about another person's behavior. It is also about our internal capacity to receive trust. Some individuals find it easy to trust because their emotional system was built in safety. Others find trust difficult, even in relationships where the other person behaves lovingly and consistently. These individuals are not broken. They are protecting themselves from wounds that once cut deeply. To understand trust is to understand that people do not fear connection. They fear the emotional injury that connection can bring. Vulnerability is the emotional key that unlocks trust. Vulnerability is the willingness to reveal parts of oneself that could be hurt. Insecurities, fears, mistakes, hopes, desires, flaws, dreams, and emotional needs. The paradox of vulnerability is that it feels risky, but is also necessary for closeness. Without vulnerability, relationships remain superficial. People may talk, laugh, work, or share experiences, but the connection lacks depth. Vulnerability creates depth by allowing two people to step into each other's internal world. When someone shares a fear and the other responds with empathy, trust grows. When someone admits a mistake and the other responds with understanding, trust deepens. When someone expresses a need and the other responds with care, the emotional bond strengthens. Vulnerability is not weakness.
It is the courage to risk emotional exposure in order to build genuine connection. However, vulnerability is also the doorway through which trust can be destroyed. When someone reveals their inner self and the response is judgment, rejection, ridicule, or betrayal, the emotional injury is profound. The mind quickly learns, I must protect myself. I cannot open again. These moments shape the architecture of trust more powerfully than positive experiences. Humans are designed to avoid pain, and emotional pain leaves a deeper imprint than emotional joy. This is why trust is easy to break, but difficult to build. The human mind is more sensitive to threat than to safety, more alert to betrayal than to consistency. Understanding this asymmetry is essential when navigating trust in any relationship.
A fascinating dimension of trust is its relationship to consistency. People trust not only based on what others do, but on whether their behavior remains stable over time. Someone may be kind once, but if their behavior changes unpredictably, trust weakens. Consistency is psychological safety. Unpredictability is psychological danger. Humans fear what they cannot predict. When someone behaves inconsistently, warm one moment, distant the next, the nervous system becomes hyper-alert, scanning for signs of danger. The brain interprets inconsistency as emotional threat. This is why inconsistent behavior, even without harmful intent, can damage trust as deeply as betrayal. Stability, reliability, honesty, and predictable emotional presence are the building blocks of trust. They send a message to the mind, I can relax. I know what to expect. I am safe with you. Another powerful factor in trust dynamics is honesty. People often assume honesty is simply telling the truth, but honesty in emotional relationships is far more complex. Honesty is the willingness to show the truth of your feelings, even when those feelings are uncomfortable. It is the willingness to admit when you are hurt, confused, unsure, or afraid. It is the ability to say what is real, rather than hiding behind defensiveness, silence, or avoidance. Trust grows not when someone is perfect, but when they are authentic. Perfection creates distance. Authenticity creates connection. When someone senses emotional honesty, they feel they are engaging with a real human being rather than a mask. This generates trust more powerfully than any promise or reassurance. Communication plays a central role in the formation and preservation of trust. Miscommunication can damage trust even when no harm is intended. A misunderstood tone, a poorly timed comment, an unspoken need, or a misinterpreted silence can all trigger emotional insecurity. People often assume that misunderstanding signals indifference or rejection, when in reality it signals the limitations of communication itself. When someone strives to clarify misunderstandings, repair emotional disconnects, and reaffirm their intention, trust grows because it demonstrates responsibility and care. Trust does not require perfection, it requires repair. The ability to repair emotional ruptures is one of the strongest predictors of trust longevity. Empathy, as explored in the previous chapter, is another essential ingredient in trust. When someone feels understood, they naturally trust more. Empathy signals emotional presence. Presence signals safety. Safety creates trust. When empathy is absent, misunderstandings multiply. The mind fills emotional gaps with fear, suspicion, or insecurity. In this vacuum, trust weakens. Empathy, therefore, is the emotional bridge that keeps trust alive in difficult moments. It allows two people to navigate tension without falling into disconnection. Fear is the greatest enemy of trust. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, fear of failure, fear of inadequacy.
These fears do not destroy trust by themselves. Rather, they distort perception. A small delay in responding becomes a sign of disinterest. A brief silence becomes emotional withdrawal. A forgotten detail becomes a signal of unimportance. Fear causes the mind to interpret neutral behavior negatively, creating emotional distance where none was intended. For trust to flourish, fear must be acknowledged and understood. Healthy relationships do not remove fear, but they provide enough emotional safety for fear to be expressed rather than hidden. Boundaries are another essential but often misunderstood component of trust. People believe that closeness means having no boundaries, but in reality, boundaries make closeness possible. A boundary is not rejection, it is clarity about emotional needs and limitations. When a person communicates boundaries respectfully and consistently, trust increases because the relationship becomes emotionally predictable. Boundaries define safety, they prevent resentment, they create clarity. Without boundaries, people overextend themselves, become overwhelmed, disconnect, or develop resentment. These reactions damage trust far more than a clear boundary ever could. Trust grows not from unlimited access, but from respectful emotional structure.
Trust is deeply affected by how people handle power. When someone uses emotional information against another, bringing up past vulnerabilities during conflict, manipulating emotions, punishing honesty, the damage to trust is profound. Emotional misuse is one of the deepest forms of betrayal because it violates the sacred space of vulnerability. In contrast, when someone protects your vulnerability, even during conflict, trust expands exponentially. Trust is built in these subtle moments, the moment someone chooses kindness over winning, understanding over judgment, patience over frustration. Rebuilding trust after damage is both possible and difficult. It requires consistency, accountability, transparency, and emotional effort. The injured person must see new patterns over time, not words alone. Trust cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Rebuilding involves vulnerability from both sides. The one who was hurt must risk believing again, and the one who caused harm must accept responsibility and demonstrate change. Healing trust is the recreation of safety through repeated emotional reliability. Ultimately, trust and vulnerability form the emotional heart of human interaction. Trust gives people the courage to be vulnerable, and vulnerability deepens trust. Together, they create intimacy, connection, and emotional stability. Without trust, relationships become fragile. Without vulnerability, relationships become shallow. But when trust and vulnerability coexist, human connection becomes something powerful, a sanctuary of emotional truth, where two individuals can reveal themselves without fear, grow without shame, love without defensiveness, and exist without masks. Trust is not built by perfection, but by presence, not by promises, but by consistency, not by grand gestures, but by everyday acts of emotional care, not by avoiding conflict, but by navigating conflict with empathy. Trust is the quiet, steady feeling that someone sees you, hears you, respects you, understands you, and holds your vulnerability with gentleness. It is the invisible reassurance that you are not alone in the world. And when trust reaches this depth, it becomes one of the most transformative forces in human life. A force that changes the way we love, the way we heal, the way we grow, and the way we become ourselves in the presence of another.
Chapter 9. The Psychology of Influence and Persuasion.
Influence is one of the most powerful forces in human interaction. It shapes our decisions, our beliefs, our relationships, and even the way we see ourselves. Persuasion is often misunderstood as manipulation or pressure, but in reality, persuasion is a natural psychological process that occurs whenever one person affects the thoughts or behavior of another. Humans influence one another constantly through emotions, expressions, tone, presence, stories, memories, and expectations. We influence others through who we are, not only through what we say. The psychology of influence and persuasion is the study of how people are shaped by the social environment around them, and understanding it reveals both the vulnerability and the strength of the human mind. Influence begins long before a message is delivered. It begins with perception. People are more likely to be influenced by someone they perceive as trustworthy, competent, warm, or similar to themselves. These perceptions are formed in seconds and are shaped by subconscious cues, body language, tone, posture, facial expression, or the energy a person brings into a room. Influence is impossible without a foundation of psychological receptivity. And receptivity is created by the emotional impression one person leaves on another. When someone feels safe, understood, or respected, their mind opens naturally. When they feel judged, threatened, or inferior, their mind closes, regardless of the logic or importance of what is being said. Trust is the heart of influence. Without trust, persuasion becomes manipulation. With trust, persuasion becomes collaboration. A person who trusts another interprets their words as helpful, not controlling. They listen without defensiveness. They question without suspicion. They consider new ideas without fear of deception. Trust lowers emotional resistance, allowing influence to enter the mind gently rather than forcefully. This is why influence often flows from relationships more than arguments, from emotional presence more than intellectual skill. The most persuasive people are not those with the strongest logic, but those who create the deepest sense of safety. Emotion is another fundamental force in influence. Human beings like to believe they make decisions based on logic, but neuroscience reveals that emotions guide decisions long before logic enters the picture. When someone feels inspired, hopeful, understood, valued, or connected, they become more open to influence. When they feel anxious, defensive, ashamed, or threatened, influence collapses. Persuasion is not about convincing the mind. It is about reaching the emotional core that shapes the mind's openness. This is why stories are persuasive. Stories bypass the analytical mind and speak to emotions. A well-told story creates empathy, and empathy creates influence. Facts inform, emotions transform. Identity plays an equally powerful role in persuasion. Humans are constantly shaping and reshaping their sense of self, who they are, who they want to be, what they believe in, and how they want others to see themselves. When a message aligns with someone's identity, it is accepted naturally. When it contradicts their identity, it is resisted fiercely. People are more likely to be persuaded when the message supports their self-image, affirms their values, or offers them a path to becoming the person they aspire to be. Influence occurs not by challenging identity, but by guiding it gently. The psychology of persuasion reveals that people change not when they are forced to, but when change feels aligned with who they believe they are.
Similarity also enhances influence. Humans trust and listen more to those who resemble them emotionally, culturally, or experientially. Similarity creates rapport and rapport reduces psychological distance. The more someone feels, "This person understands me," the more influence that person has. This similarity can be real or perceived. What matters is the emotional effect. When two people feel psychologically aligned, persuasion becomes a natural collaboration, rather than a battle between conflicting perspectives. Consistency is another powerful force. People crave internal consistency because inconsistency creates psychological discomfort. When someone commits to an idea, belief, or behavior, even in small ways, they are more likely to maintain that commitment in the future. This is why influence often begins with tiny agreements, small emotional alignments, or subtle shifts in perspective. Once someone has taken a small step in one direction, the mind naturally seeks to justify and continue that direction. Persuasion is effective when it respects this internal need for consistency. Social proof is a major psychological driver. Humans often look to others when making decisions, especially in situations of uncertainty. When people see that others approve of an idea, follow a behavior, or trust a person, they are more willing to align with that choice. This instinct has deep evolutionary roots. In early human societies, following the group increased survival. Today, this instinct manifests in trends, opinions, beliefs, and even emotional reactions. When the people around us adopt a mindset, we internalize parts of it unconsciously. Social proof is persuasion through observation rather than argument.
Authority also shapes influence, but not in the simplistic sense of obedience. Authority and persuasion is psychological authority, competence, confidence, clarity, and emotional groundedness. A person who speaks with calm certainty influences others more than someone who speaks with anxiety or defensiveness. People trust those who demonstrate mastery, not those who demand it. True authority emerges from internal alignment, emotional stability, and a consistent sense of purpose. People follow those who embody what they speak. Reciprocity is another foundational principle of influence. When someone receives kindness, respect, or support, the natural human instinct is to reciprocate. Influence grows when people feel valued rather than used. When someone gives emotional presence, others open emotionally. When someone gives respect, others listen. When someone gives vulnerability, others soften. Influence is a cycle, not an imposition. It is built on mutual emotional exchange. Scarcity also plays a role, though it is often misunderstood. Scarcity does not only refer to limited resources, it refers to emotional uniqueness. When someone feels that a relationship, an opportunity, or a moment is unique or special, their emotional investment increases. Scarcity creates focus, and focus intensifies influence. Not because people are selfish, but because they value what feels meaningful, rare, or irreplaceable.
The psychology of persuasion also revolves around framing. The way information is framed influences how it is perceived. A message framed as opportunity inspires movement. A message framed as threat provokes defensiveness. This does not mean manipulating emotions, but understanding that every message exists within a psychological context. People do not hear words, they hear meanings. They do not respond to facts, they respond to interpretations. Influence grows when one learns the emotional frame through which another person sees the world. Listening is perhaps the most underrated persuasive skill. When someone feels heard deeply, without interruption or judgment, they naturally become open to the other person's perspective. Listening creates influence not through speaking, but through understanding. When people feel understood, they trust.
When they trust, they consider new ideas. Influence is rarely the result of strong arguments. It is the result of strong listening. Fear can influence behavior, but it creates fragile persuasion. When people comply out of fear, the influence lasts only as long as the fear remains. When the fear disappears, the behavior collapses. Persuasion built on fear is temporary and damaging. Persuasion built on emotional resonance is lasting and empowering. Persuasion also requires patience. Humans rarely change instantly. Change is a gradual realignment of beliefs, emotions, and identity. Influence involves planting seeds, not forcing outcomes. It involves guiding rather than pushing. When someone feels pressured, their psychological reactance rises. They resist not because they disagree, but because they want to reclaim autonomy. True influence respects autonomy, offering choices rather than demands. The most effective persuasive force is not control, but empowerment. Self-awareness is essential in persuasion. A person must understand their own intentions, emotional biases, and internal motivations. Influence becomes harmful when unconscious needs, such as the need for power, approval, or validation, distort communication. Ethical influence requires inner alignment. When someone speaks from clarity, authenticity, and good intention, their influence becomes clean and grounded.
The psychology of influence also reveals that people are persuaded more by what they feel than by what they're told. A message delivered with confidence is persuasive. A message delivered with empathy is persuasive. A message delivered with calmness is persuasive. The emotional state of the messenger shapes the emotional state of the listener. Influence is the transfer of emotional energy long before it is the transfer of information. Influence is also shaped by environment. A supportive environment expands openness. A hostile environment contracts it. A relaxed environment allows for reflection. A tense environment triggers survival instincts. The context in which persuasion occurs is often more important than the content itself.
One of the deepest truths about influence is this: people are most persuaded when the message aligns with their own internal desires. You cannot persuade someone to want something they do not want, but you can awaken the desire already inside them. You cannot force belief, but you can guide someone toward a belief that resonates with their experience. Persuasion is not about planting ideas. It is about activating the ideas that already exist in dormant form within the person's emotional world. Ultimately, the psychology of influence and persuasion teaches us that influence is not a technique, but a relationship. It is the result of emotional trust, psychological alignment, authentic presence, and shared humanity. People do not resist influence. They resist pressure. They do not resist guidance. They resist control. They do not resist new ideas. They resist feeling misunderstood. When influence becomes a natural extension of empathy, respect, and emotional connection, it transforms from manipulation into leadership, from coercion into collaboration, from control into harmony. Influence, at its highest level, is not about changing others. It is about creating the emotional conditions in which others can change themselves. Persuasion is not about winning arguments. It is about understanding the emotional architecture of the human mind. And when influence is rooted in empathy, authenticity, and psychological wisdom, it becomes one of the most powerful forces for growth, healing, and connection in human life.
Conclusion. Human behavior, with all its complexity, mystery, contradictions, and beauty, is ultimately the story of the human mind trying to understand itself in the presence of others. Throughout this book, we have journeyed through the subtle forces that shape how people think, feel, and act. through perception, emotion, memory, influence, trust, empathy, conflict, and the intricate patterns that define every individual. What becomes clear after exploring these psychological landscapes is that human interaction is not a random series of events, but a deeply structured experience shaped by invisible emotional currents that flow beneath our awareness. Every reaction has a history. Every behavior has a root. Every pattern has a purpose. Every misunderstanding has a story, and every person carries within them a universe of experiences waiting to be seen. The true art of understanding people lies not in analyzing them from a distance, but in meeting them with presence, patience, and curiosity. It lies in seeing beyond words into intentions, beyond mistakes into fears, beyond patterns into pain, and beyond behavior into the emotional world that lives underneath. When we read people with this depth, we no longer react blindly. We no longer assume intentions. We no longer fall into cycles of conflict fueled by misunderstanding. Instead, we begin to understand that what people express on the surface is only a fraction of what they truly feel inside. And in this understanding, our relationships transform. We learn that empathy is not simply a virtue, but a psychological key that unlocks trust, vulnerability, repair, and connection. We learn that trust does not grow from perfection, but from consistency, authenticity, and emotional safety. We learn that influence does not require force or argument, but sensitivity to the emotional architecture of the human mind. We learn that conflict is not a sign of incompatibility, but a signal of unspoken needs. We learn that no one behaves without reason. The reasons are simply hidden until we look deeply enough. The more we understand others, the more we understand ourselves. The patterns we notice in others reflect the patterns we must examine within ourselves. The conflicts we navigate with others mirror the conflicts that live quietly in our own hearts. The empathy we extend outward must also be turned inward. True understanding begins with the courage to explore our own emotional world, to confront our fears, acknowledge our wounds, question our assumptions, and recognize the unconscious scripts that shape our behavior. Only then can we meet others with the clarity and compassion that real connection requires. The ultimate truth revealed throughout this book is that human interaction is an emotional exchange, not an intellectual transaction. People connect through shared vulnerability, mutual recognition, and the feeling of being understood, not through arguments, judgments, or expectations. When we approach others with emotional intelligence, our relationships become not only more peaceful, but more meaningful. We begin to build connections rooted in authenticity rather than performance, understanding rather than assumption, and presence rather than reaction. To understand people is not to decode them like puzzles or predict them like calculations. It is to recognize the humanity they carry, their hopes, fears, memories, dreams, insecurities, and desires. It is to see them not as strangers, but as emotional beings shaped by stories we may never know. And when we learn to see people with this depth, our interactions shift from superficial exchanges to moments of real connection. We communicate with intention, listen with empathy, respond with wisdom, and influence with integrity. In the end, the greatest gift you can bring to any relationship is understanding, genuine, patient, compassionate understanding. It does not mean agreeing with everything others say. It does not mean accepting harmful behavior. It means seeing the emotional truth behind the action, the wound behind the reaction, and the story behind the pattern. When you understand people this way, you do not control them,
You connect with them. You do not change them. You inspire them. You do not judge them. You recognize them.
And perhaps the most important realization is this: every person you meet is fighting an internal battle you cannot see. Every person is carrying something heavy. Every person is longing to be understood. Every person is trying, in their own imperfect way, to feel safe, valued, and loved. When you remember this, you engage with others not from fear or defense, but from humanity. May this understanding become not only knowledge in your mind, but wisdom in your life, guiding your conversations, shaping your relationships, and illuminating the path toward deeper, more meaningful human connection.